folks, welcome back to Indaba Africa. This is Chris once again. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Chris Wyatt Africa here on the Indaba Africa channel, part of the Indaba Broadcasting Network. It is Thursday, October 28th, 2021. Somebody call a cop. I want the year back. It's been stolen from us. It's just gone like that. Well, continuing coverage of South Africa's 2021 municipal elections. And here today, I'm very excited to have a special guest, the Deputy President of the United Democratic Movement, the UDM. You've seen General Bantu Holomisa on my program previously a few times, and we want to get this gentleman on. He's young, he's full of vigor, and he's here to talk to us about how it's going. But listen, we got to be straight with you folks. I'm just happy he's here. I mean, you know, we're not talking about elections anymore. Now it's all about load shedding. Oh, my goodness. So with that, let me introduce the Deputy President of UDM, as I embarrass myself with my best effort to pronounce his given name and his surname. His surname is easier for me, but the given name's a tough one. So it's Nqabayomzi Kwankwa. I messed it up. How are you, sir? We got you on mute. Just get you off mute and we'll have you join us.
Chris, thank you very much, and thank you very much for having us. And good morning to the listeners at home.
Well, I have to say that one thing that I've become very interested in over the past year and a half or so since my retirement from active service is that, you know, I actively promote Basotho, Northern Sotho, and Tswana and Afrikaans on my program. Those are three ethnic groups I have a lot of affinity with from my experience in interacting with them in Botswana and in Lesotho and South Africa. But I have become more and more curious about Xhosa over the past year, and my difficulty pronouncing your given name has just pushed me to say I need to learn some of that language. So, yes. Welcome to the program. It's a real pleasure to have you on. I'm really excited. I've told people this is the most consequential election in South Africa's modern history. Do you think I've overstated it, or do you think it's actually that important?
No, it's very important because I think we are at a point in our lives where people have gotten to understand to the full extent what the ANC government is capable of offering. I mean, out of the 278 municipalities that we have around the country, you'll find that there's about 162 of them that have financial crisis or facing some or other financial crisis. There's about 40 of them that are unable to deliver basic services, and one or two of them that have so far adopted budgets that they can afford. So if one were to take a macro snapshot or an overview of the municipalities, especially that are run by the governing party, they are in a state of disaster and in crisis. So it means that the voters have become very conscious now of what they require from their public representatives and from their governments. And they know exactly what it is that they expect and what they need. And if you can't meet those demands, I think they're in a better position now to be able to tell you to step aside.
Well, it is interesting because with the exception of a few municipalities and a brief period in the last 5 years when there was either a coalition with the Democratic Alliance and some other smaller parties or just outright control in Cape Town, which has been the case for the DA for a long time, virtually every municipality across the country, except for a few in KZN where the Inkatha Freedom Party has controlled them, have been controlled by the African National Congress for nigh on 27 years now. And it's interesting to see the ANC, the way they react. I saw that Julius Malema from the Economic Freedom Fighters came out on Tuesday in Buffalo City and said that load shedding is a well-orchestrated campaign or scheme by the ANC to deny smaller parties votes. It's interesting that he says that. The ANC's initial response, this is a blue lie. It's absolutely untrue. 12 hours later, the ANC comes out in the press and accuses elements of Eskom of undermining its campaign and sabotaging the ANC. Just mind-boggling. Eskom is a state-run parastatal run by the bureaucracy, controlled by the ANC for the last 27 years. If you go back to the apartheid era, not that this is a plus or minus for the apartheid era, but the truth is that Eskom produced 42% of all electricity consumed in sub-Saharan Africa then. And today they can't even keep the lights on in the midst of the Matrix happening this weekend, and then we've got the election on Monday. But now they're blaming an organization they control. I mean, if you're a voter, what do you do? I mean, who's responsible for this? You got to speak shaking your head.
No, they are grasping at straws. It's because what they're trying to do is disassociate themselves from the mess that they've created at Eskom. We are where we are today because of the poor governance systems, the corruption, the hollowing out of state institutions by the African National Congress over an extended period of time. I mean, if you were to look at load shedding, it started in 2008 towards the end of former President Mbeki's term. And when it happened, they apologized for it and promised to turn the situation around in a very short space of time. 13 years later, we're still experiencing load shedding. And what is unforgivable about what they've done is that we've invested as a country billions and billions of rands into building power stations that are not even operational, fully operational, optimal yet. At the minute when they are supposed to go live, then you are told that you are expected to go live, I beg your pardon, you are told that there's some or other technical problem that needs to be fixed, which will most probably require billions of rands to sort out. I mean, we as a party told them many years ago that if we were to sort out the energy requirements of the country, a growing economy, a high rate of urbanization, as you see, because they have not been able to invest in rural economies properly, you have to decentralize electricity generation, but also allow the private sector to play a role. I mean, they only woke up a couple of months ago, if not a year ago, when we started talking about decentralizing energy generation as far back as 2016 in that local government election, saying you need the independent power producers to be able to power up municipalities that can afford to procure electricity from private sector role players. You also need, because most of the metros have the financial muscle to be able to procure and to be able to even build their own wind farms, for an example, if need be, or to partner up with companies that can help them with solar energy solutions. But the ANC was reluctant to do that. They're only waking up now, but they're also frustrating the process by being slow when it comes to the necessary legislative framework that we require and the regulations that we need to put in place to give effect to that.
Well, now you're drinking the same coffee I'm drinking here. We're the same Kool-Aid. We're talking about privatization and the independent power producers, the marketplace having an impact here. But to be fair to the African National Congress, if you privatize or decentralized control of Eskom, then that robs them the opportunity to put their patronage picks to go on the board, to pay overpriced for contracts getting services that are 10 times inflated what they actually cost so that people can take backdoor bribes. It really limits their ability to maintain the loyalty of their patronage network. So I'm not so sure that they didn't open their eyes. I suspect that this was intentional, and South Africans are paying the price. You know, it's one of the challenges for people interested in foreign direct investment in South Africa is the fact that there's no reliable electricity supply. You can't go there and manufacture vaccines, for instance, that have to be refrigerated when you have no power. You can't produce milk products and cheese when you have no power or you have no clean water. It's absolutely crazy. Now, that's a national competency, though. We can beat up on the African National Congress forever. You know, it's ironic because I was very generous to the ANC during the liberation struggle, after the liberation struggle, and honestly didn't really start speaking and saying negative things in a serious manner until about 2019, when it just became pretty obvious that Ramaphosa was not intent on the reform he claimed to be. But those are national competencies. Let's talk about your party and an opportunity to do something here. Is this the year of the small party? I've been asking that question for months, and now I see that some analysts in South Africa are saying the same thing. When I say small, smaller. Let's put this in relative terms. It's smaller. Your party has been quite large at national level in the past. But recently, in the last election, the municipal elections, not the best performance, about 76,000 ward votes. I'm sure you can improve on that this time. What are your thoughts about the UDM, and can it make some traction here? And you've been out campaigning or have people out campaigning. How has it gone? Is it going well, or are you guys making progress?
The first thing that we recognized as a mistake we made in 2019 when we were campaigning for the national elections and not so much the local government elections was that we followed a lot of information that we got from pollsters saying that there was potential for growth for the party in some regions in the country. And then in our strategic planning session, we decided to plow a lot of resources into those regions. But little did we know that we're not going to get anything, but we're going to be penalized by our base for having neglected it during that period. So what we have decided to do this time around was to make sure that we rebuild our base, consolidate it, campaign in the Eastern Cape in particular, because we want to make sure that we take at least 2 municipalities, both metros, in fact, of that province away from the African National Congress. We are working to ensure that in Buffalo City municipality, we are a factor, or we are the kingmakers when it comes to the formation of the coalition government after elections. And because the African National Congress is responsible for the mess in which that municipality finds itself, the likelihood that would form a coalition government with them, there is zero. We are also, because we're already part of a coalition government with the Democratic Alliance in the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro, we want to continue with that, because I think over the past 8-9 months since we've been in power, we have actually done sterling work in terms of improving the service delivery rate and record, and want to improve on all those performance indicators. So we're going around PE, asking our people to give us a chance to build on the good work and the foundation that we've laid so far. We're also in that very same Eastern Cape province trying to make sure that you might recall that in the early stages of our democracy, the UDM it was once in charge of the King Sabata Dalindyebo municipality in the former Transkei area. And that municipality is also in a mess. So what we're trying to do is to get KSD municipality away from the ANC, have a coalition government in the Buffalo City Metro, have a coalition government with progressive political parties at the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro, be a factor in Johannesburg at the city of Joburg when the coalition government is formed after elections, and have an impact as well in the Western Cape. If we can do that, that is what we are focusing on, because we're trying to rebuild the party and to build the base as we prepare for 2024 elections. Because the discussions we've always had with smaller parties was that if we were to make this year and 2024 and the years ahead a period for smaller parties, each political party must focus on building and consolidating its base, but also making sure that it serves the interest of the people that have elected it. Because with the coalition government, for example, in PE, you have a lot of coalition partners around the table who come to the table with the requirements and the needs of their constituencies. And by each constituency, rather political party serving its constituents, you have a cumulative effect, which then results in the improvement of the overall service delivery record of government. Yes, I make this point mindful of the fact that coalition governments do tend to have teething problems right at the beginning, but they require strong leadership.
Well, this is a very interesting way you framed this to explain how the party needs to move forward in this election. But I just want to fade back for a second here, because I didn't really do this and talk about this. But from what I've understand, you, like me, kind of had humble beginnings. I mean, you worked as a cleaner and as a security guard, trying to get your education. I think you got a degree in economics at some point, if I'm not mistaken, and
yes,
and you moved up. So I think maybe it's fair in some respects to say you're a self-made man. You drove yourself to become successful. You're a father, and you're a successful man, and that's possible in South Africa despite all the challenges. Sometimes we lose sight of that.
Yes. It is possible. I think there was a time, I grew up during the Nelson Mandela era, where I think the slogan for the country was alive with possibilities. In fact, when the Democratic Alliance talks about creating an open opportunity society for all, that was the Nelson Mandela and his government's philosophy when it came to opening up opportunities for all South Africans. And indeed, through both word and deed, they tried their level best to create such a society for everyone. But at the same time, I think even now, some of the opportunities and the foundations that they laid then still exist, but I don't think we talk enough about the opportunities that especially exist for young people who want to make something of their lives. But we're hoping at times that because most young people know where I come from and know that there are many other young leaders who have humble beginnings or humble backgrounds, such as myself, that they can be able to draw inspiration from that and understand that if they work hard, they can be able to make something of their lives.
Well, and I think that's the key, which somehow is lost, and not just in South Africa. It seems, I spent most of my military career overseas, 23 of 36 years overseas, much of that in Africa for 2 decades. And I come back to America, and a lot of that respect for work and the dignity that comes with work and making a way in yourself seems to have disappeared in society. There seems to be an awful lot of you owe me, or I'm entitled to this on this side, and I've also seen it on that side. And I don't know how we got there, but it's got to be very frustrating for someone like yourself and myself who saw that we wanted to get somewhere and we worked hard to get there, and other people are going, well, it just should be handed to me. No, you've got to earn your way in life, and I think that that's really something that probably society-wise we've got to fix on both sides of the Atlantic. Yeah.
Correct.
Well, here's another thing is that. For those outside South Africa, even a lot of people in South Africa, because I've got some comments here in the chat from some of the viewers, and they're kind of surprised to hear the positions you're in. And this is the first thing I'd like to say before I take this point and ask you a question. And this is that one of the reasons I like the UDM and I like to talk to General Holomisa now to this gentleman is because I don't agree with everything they say, but we have a cogent, reasonable, calm discussion about things and actually agree with a lot of what they have to say. So that's the kind of discourse people need in society. But Vikas De Beer said, I'm happy to hear they're not just another ANC with a different name and logo. No, not remotely. Not even remotely. If you know the history of the UDM, they're not even remotely that. They're their own party. And that brings me to the question I'm going to ask you, and this is this. So, of course, inside South Africa, and especially outside South Africa, people think Inkatha Freedom Party, Mangosuthu Buthelezi. But he's no longer the president of the party. Labisa is the president, and I've interviewed him recently. But a lot of people don't know that, even in South Africa, because that personality. Now, in his case, he's just a larger-than-life personality from all his interactions with politicians. But to be fair, in his own right, General Bantu Holomisa is also a larger-than-life figure, going back to his days, back during when the Bantustans were around and his service there in military and as a leader of a country not recognized by others. And then his forming of the UDM, he's a larger-than-life figure too. But at some point, these iconic figures leave the stage and the next generation either is already in place, and it appears that's the case in UDM. So do you face any challenges because he's such a well-known figure and he's been a face of the UDM for such a long time, or is that not a concern and when you try to go get votes?
Well, in the initial stages, when I had just been elected as the deputy of the party, obviously I did experience challenges because I was forever in the shadow of the big general, and I had to carve my own niche, so to speak, as a young leader and his deputy, and to try and make sure that I earn the respect of my peers. Firstly, you have to earn the respect of your peers in your own political party before your focus can be outward. But I think even the general himself played because I've been mentored by the general, he still continues to mentor me. So he has played a stellar role, a wonderful role in trying to nurture me, point me to opportunities, open doors for me so that I myself could also be known as the deputy leader of the UDM, because I think the party at the time when I was elected in 2016 was trying to, the strategy was to try and have a generational mix, a good generational mix in the National Executive Committee of the party, but to also show to the public that there's a succession plan that is underway, that is being undertaken, because they know that the senior leaders know they are not going to be around forever. And the time had come for them to invest in the second layer of leadership. And I've also done the same thing, exactly the same thing that has been done to me by the senior leaders of the party. Is exactly what I do to other young people in the party, where I try to put them into strategic positions, position of authority in the party, and trust them with the responsibilities that are going to help us in future, because we have to nurture them now so that when it's my turn in future, whether it's 5 years or 10 years, time is on my side. I'm not in a hurry. Whether it's 5 years or 10 years or whenever the baton is passed over to me, I know exactly who the people that I can rely on. I know that I have a competent community of leaders that I can lead the organization. So it's been a privilege for me to lead with the general and the other senior leaders of the party.
Well, I can imagine when you were first elevated and elected that position, some of the tannies and the grannies that supported the party for a long time. Who is this young boy? Who is he?
Correct.
Who is this?
Correct. And then in the initial stages, you would say the general would be invited to speak at an event, and he would delegate you to attend it on his behalf. As soon as you walk in, they don't even realize or recognize you as their deputy. Who's this young man? Are we going to listen to him now? Are we supposed to listen to him?
Yeah, that's very, very good. You sound just like the tannies and grannies there.
Yes.
Well done. No, I could just picture that. I could just picture that in my mind. Listen, I've never worn any political shirts before, but I'm telling you, I'm loving that UDM polo you've got on there. I'm going to have to secure one of those for myself. That's an awesome polo.
No, thank you. Definitely courier to you. Thank you.
That's a beautiful one there. So, okay, great. So that hasn't been a challenge for you. What has been, and I think we know the answer to this, probably your answer is going to be service delivery, but what has been the biggest theme that you've heard from people who are interested in voting and say they might vote for your party or they're going to vote for your party? What is the biggest theme in this election that's taking place right now?
The biggest thing is because people have lost jobs since COVID hit. So it's job creation. It's people expect you to try and find ways of reigniting the local economy and supporting their companies, their small companies. They complain about the fact that the local sector, the informal sector of the economy at municipal level gets very little to no support from government. In fact, in the majority of instances, they get victimized by governments for say, littering pavements instead of providing them with the necessary infrastructure and the support they need to formalize their businesses. The other issue has to do with basic things where you have load shedding right now. And when I was in Port Elizabeth, people were saying, you have a wind farm right next to PE, but that wind farm is not able to power up the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro with electricity. So they want you to address those issues. When you go to villages, for example, my village did not have water, running water, even though the taps are there. The taps have been dry for the past 2 months. And the only time sometimes they seem to work is when there's someone from national leadership of the ANC or a public figure that visits the village, then the water runs for 2-3 days, and then you don't know what happens after that. The other issue which people are complaining about is that the indigent policy of municipalities allows for the municipality to provide free basic units, electricity units per month to poor families. And that's supposed to range between 50 and 100 units per month. That policy has never been implemented by government. In instances where they were not able, especially in the Eastern Cape, in instances where they are not able to provide that free basic electricity units, they are supposed to, at the very least, provide those families that they've identified with illuminating paraffin, and that has not happened either. Now, they find themselves now having to collect woods, even though the infrastructure for electricity is there, collect woods from the fields in order for them to be able to prepare meals and to have energy. So people require really basic things. Others, for example, when you go to the former Transkei area, the roads aren't passable at all. So people expect basic things like roads so that they can be able to go to clinics, so that they can be able to get public transport to access them, even medical services unable to access them. So it's basic service delivery issues, bread and butter issues that people require from us. And that's one of the things I like, by the way, about local government elections, because you don't get lost or you don't get to try and bamboozle people with ideological nonsense. All they want is bread and butter issues, and that you must be held to account on what you promise.
Which is interesting because both the economic freedom fighters and the ANC spent all their time on their manifesto making promises for things that have nothing to do with municipal capabilities.
Yes.
The EFF made 8 promises. 6 of them are things not their competency. They can't do them. They're at the national level.
Correct.
So we're going to do this. We're going to do this. And I'm like, okay, you falling for this? There's only 2 things that they can actually tackle. Pretty crazy. Now, you've opened up a whole Pandora's box of some really good topics right there that I was going to get to, and I'll just get to some of those questions right now. And that's, you talk about the taps. Now, famously, a few years ago, the climate zealots, and I'm not saying there's not climate change, or there is climate change. That's not where I'm going with this, but the climate zealots, and these are the people that scream the sky is falling all the time without looking at every aspect of what's going on, said that climate change is why Cape Town had no water, ignoring the fact that the population is 500% of what it was in 1910, ignoring the fact that the city loses 35 to 45% of its water through leaky pipes, and that water is misused, and that there's no brown water reused for using water to water lawns instead of using fresh, clean water. None of that consideration. Now, the Cape Town, the reservoirs are full. They've had great rain. They're at 100%. But that's not been the case in the Eastern Cape when Nelson Mandela Bay and Coog and other places have suffered severely. So is the water issue in your hometown, for instance, is it because the reservoirs are really low, or is it because of just neglect of the pipes and the maintenance of the system?
In my village, it's the neglect of the maintenance of the infrastructure. It has not been maintained. I think that infrastructure was put up when Mandela was still president, more than 20 years ago. So most of that infrastructure has broken down completely. And the resources that should be used to maintain the infrastructure have been spent on the compensation of employees of municipalities. And compensation of employees for workers of municipalities who don't even report for work, right? And that's a problem in general. And I think the other issue has to do with the fact that the municipality doesn't pay the debt it owes to Eskom, right? But it keeps collecting money for electricity from the residents. So it charges people, but now it never takes that money and pays it over to Eskom. It uses it for other operational expenses. Chief among them, obviously, is this compensation of employees and maintaining the very expensive lifestyle of politicians who are councillors and mayors at those levels. So priorities are upside down.
Yeah, they're upside down. They're out of whack. Well, I think I understand where the model for that comes from, taking the money for the electricity and then using it yourself instead of paying the provider, taking it from the residents. It reminds me of Latuli House. You were talking about creating jobs. The ANC can create jobs at Latuli House. They just can't pay their employees. So they can't pay their employees. Not only that, sorry, we can't. I feel bad for the people that work for Latuli House. I really do. But not only do they not pay them, when they did pay them, they took the money for the unemployment insurance fund and their taxes, and they kept it for the ANC instead of paying it to the government itself. It's just, so I think the model was
unforgivable.
Well, no, the model was crafted right there at Latuli House, and they just as they deploy their cadres, their incompetent cadres around the country. But listen, we do have to be fair to the ANC from this standpoint. You mentioned it over 20 years ago, the taps were put in there. At the end of apartheid, it was ridiculous how many, especially black South Africans, but not exclusively, black South Africans were not on the power grid. They had no access to electricity. They didn't have piped water. I mean, large numbers of people, millions of people didn't have that. And in those early stages, to be fair to the ANC, there was a concerted effort, and 5 million homes were built. We can argue about the quality of those homes and location. That's a legitimate argument. But homes were built, and I don't necessarily think that's the government's role, but whatever, that's fine. They made it happen. And then electricity, the grid was spread so that over 90% of the population has access to electricity now. Of course, it's never on because Eskom is always load shedding. That's a different story. And the water was spread. But as you said, there obviously was no effort to put resources aside, or if they put aside, they just took it to maintain. You have to maintain these things and improve them. And that's kind of where we're at now. So everything the ANC did 20 years ago, these days is like, so what? What have you done for me lately?
Well, I think the problem is that I agree with you. The African National Congress started very well. Their hearts and minds were at the right place when they took over power. I mean, I'm a former member of the ANC myself. I left the ANC in 2006, and then I joined the UDM in 2007. So I know for a fact that they did well. They built houses, they provided infrastructure, but at times I think they didn't listen to people who knew what they were doing when it comes to parastatals enough. I recall that Eskom, for instance, told them many moons ago in the late 90s that they don't have, as they were rolling out electricity to areas that were not powered up in the past, they said, very soon we're going to have capacity constraints. We need to make appropriate investments. And the ANC said, no, don't worry, we're not bothered now about the demand and supply issue, which is simply economics, really, which is what has had Eskom. But the other issue is the ANC has focused a lot since the Jacob Zuma years. I want to give an example. If you were to look at the state capture during the state capture years, in the period, the 9 years that Zuma was in charge, President Zuma was in charge, they borrowed more than a trillion South African rands. More than half of that went to state capture. That's money that we could have used to maintain infrastructure, to create jobs. As a result, last year we're celebrating saying 500 billion rands bailout package for the economy during the COVID, when COVID hit. But in all honesty, we're just shifting money from budget lines to another. There was no stimulus package. Hence, after we said we spent 500 billion rands, there was no impact on the economic growth of the country, right? Instead, industries kept on dying. In fact, one of the issues one of the issues we're harping on last year was that President Ramaphosa said he was stimulating the economy, but he took the budget lines from maintenance of existing infrastructure, even though the infrastructure is crumbling, and transferred it over to other budget lines, which are not going to help to stimulate the economy. So it's all of these challenges that they have. One, they've wasted money, stolen a lot of money from the system, and now they are trying to reignite growth at a time when the country is completely broke and is on junk status, where it's difficult to attract foreign direct investment. But if you can't create an environment that is conducive for foreign direct investment to occur, you must make it easy then for direct investment in the country to take place. You can't make it easy for direct investment to take place when you have energy constraints, right? Where people aren't going to plow their money, they're just going to buy portfolio investments instead of investments that are going to improve the productive capacity of the country. So now it's where we've put ourselves in this position, and we're hoping that because we've gone around to people and told them what the problems are, we've been frank in our discussions with the people that they're at least going to vote differently and vote for parties that they feel have progressive programs and they care for their needs and interests.
Well, that's well stated, and I'd like to get a little more into in just a moment your discussion about how people invest their money, because you make a very good point. Why invest your capital in something that's capital intensive if you're going to have all these things that undermine your capital when you can just put it in a fund overseas or elsewhere and then make money off that? Yeah, so we've been in that a little bit. But folks, you're listening to Chris Wyatt Africa here on the Indaba Africa channel, part of the Indaba Broadcasting Network. It is Thursday, October 28th, and my special featured guest today is the Deputy President of the UDM, the United Democratic Movement, none other than the Honorable Mr. Kwankwa. Sir, we are having an interesting conversation here. Let's continue it. So you talk about investments there. I got to be honest with you. I've been investing ever since I had that first dollar in my pocket when I was 17-year-old. Actually, I had it in my pocket before that by baling hay and doing things on the farm. But when I first started going in the formal workforce, I started putting a little bit of money aside, and I taught myself about investing and saving and how the power of compounding, that sort of thing. As an investor, I have almost no interest in investing in South Africa, between the threat of expropriation of my property because I have the wrong skin pigmentation, to money being wasted, to the need to pay security guards out, have so many because it's so dangerous in many places, to an inefficient labor force in segments of the economy, to the low education standards that the ANC has promulgated across the country. It's really making South Africa a very unattractive investment. And that's a shame, because South Africa has amazing human capital and amazing potential. Do you get frustrated at all that foreign direct investment is kind of looking the other way in many cases?
Yes, we do. I mean, even on simple things, without digressing, Chris, I want to make a simple example. One of the discussions I had with my colleagues from the ANC in the Finance Committee was that we're all celebrating and ululating because African leaders, the AU, they signed the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement recently. But I asked the question, I said, have we then positioned our own people to be able to take advantage of opportunities that exist on the African continent? The answer was no. Because if you understand the magnitude of that agreement, then you must be able to say, what interventions are you going to make in order to ensure that your people become captains of industry in the African continent? But the other issue is you see the current education system, there's a lot of mismatch between the skills that we produce and what the economy requires, especially in the 21st century. We should have made interventions or created incentives for people to go to professions, right, that are in line with what the skills the 21st century global economy requires, so that you have skills that you are not only confined to South Africa. You can export your skills and work anywhere in the world and you still be equally effective. The other issue is you can't keep on dumping down standards and reducing the requirements for pass rates, making it easy because you want to churn people out of the high school system, and then in the process end up burdening the university system and expect that you are going to produce a high quality graduate. I mean, I'm a product of the Bantu education system, but more importantly, more than the Bantu education system, I'm a product of the teachers who were committed, the teachers who worked hard, went an extra mile, the communities and all the stakeholders who partnered and said, we want, in addition to what the apartheid government was trying to do, or despite what the African apartheid government at the time was trying to do, turn us into hewers of wood and drawers of water, is that they wanted to have an education system that was going to produce future leaders of South Africa. It seems that mindset has left us completely. It's almost like what we're trying to do under the ANC government is to focus on numbers and targets and say we have an 80% matric pass rate. But in qualitative terms, we don't sit down and say, what does it actually mean, and do a proper analysis of the stats. But at the same time, I think when you build an education system, it's philosophy. It must be because you've done an introspection and a reflection to say, what kind of South Africa do we want to become? And what kind of South African do we want to build, right? And say, to bring to the world, right? And then say, build an education system around our values, right? Around the strategic direction of the country. But what usually happens is that you have one minister that wakes up. If you appoint a new minister of education, the likelihood that the policy you adopted 5 years ago is going to be changed at the whims of the minister, rather than saying what is the strategic direction of the country. And that affects, obviously, the labor market. What we produce in the education system affects the kind of workers we are going to have in the labor market. But also, you know that you have these challenges in the education system, but you also create a labor market that is very stringent. where business people would not want to open businesses here because it's extremely difficult to fire someone. I want to make an example. We're a political party. If you're a political party, you have caucus staff members and you have people that are not pulling their weight, you'd rather fire them, right? And enter into an agreement with CCMA to say, I'm going to settle out and pay you your 3-month salary, than to go through a protracted battle at CCMA for 2-3 years, discussing nothing when you have documented evidence, for example, that the worker was not pulling the weight, the worker was behaving below average. You can't expect then business people who plow their investments to go through that red tape. But you also have, in our view, a financial system where we have not built a financial system in the country, even though we have a financial system, a world-class financial system in the country, that is attuned to the challenges and the strategy of trying to build a small business sector, right? To be able to support them with funding initiatives. Even the ones that were built DFIs in government, I think they give more money to ANC comrades than to more deserving people in the country. So there's a lot of introspection and overall of the system that we need to do in order for us to be able to attract foreign direct investment and to grow our economy.
Well, it's very, very difficult to be a neutral observer and watch what's happened to education in South Africa. I heard Cyril Ramaphosa a few months back say that Bantu education was worse than no education at all. I agree. I think the ANC's Bantu education is a disaster. That's the way that they've taken this, and I don't know. It's embarrassing. These are anecdotal cases, but there's thousands of them that go on and on. I mean, children dying in human feces in pit latrines in the Eastern Cape because they haven't spent money to put abolition units in schools 30 years after taking power. I built abolition units in Liberia where there's no industry in 30 days. And they would function so that we didn't have soldiers, using pit latrines. It can be done easily. And then you've also got these black economic empowerment tenders to tenderpreneurs to deliver textbooks to Eastern Cape schools, and there's no textbooks delivered. No one prosecuted for this. I mean, the list just goes on and on. It's quite frightening. And then we have, Minister of Higher Education, Tertiary Education, who intentionally seeks to stamp out the second most widely spoken first language in South Africa, eliminating it from universities. Of course, I'm speaking of Afrikaans. Instead of promoting all of South Africa's languages and giving the opportunity for students to learn their language. Now, listen, I'm a fine advocate for English being a medium of instruction to compete in the global scene. I got that. But in South Africa, you have 11 official languages, and only about 8% of South Africans speak English as their first language. Yet there's been a concerted effort by the ANC to make it the medium of instruction at universities for students, in many cases, who aren't prepared to study at that level of proficiency in English when they arrive at university. It beggars the imagination. The ANC has really, if you want to empower people and get rid of economic disparity and reduce the wealth gap, the first step is a proper education, not indoctrination, but education. Your party at all frustrated by where education has gone, particularly in the Eastern Cape. I mean, it breaks my heart. Honestly, I'm not kidding with you. It really breaks my heart to see these things happening in South Africa, but especially Eastern Cape, which has been neglected for so long.
No, that's correct. You see the problem. Firstly, I don't know whether it's the legacy of colonialism and apartheid, where Africans themselves tend to undermine and at times hate everything African and to embrace anything that comes from outside. The first thing I did when I first traveled to the African continent about 10, 15 years ago, I was embarrassed when I interacted with colleagues there. I found that I knew more about Europe and the US than I did about my own continent. And that's a negative reflection on the kind of education system that we receive here in South Africa. And when you go to the rest of the African continent, you find that they actually know a lot about the African continent. They know more about Africa than they do about other parts of the world. I had to educate myself about Africa, first and foremost, to make sure that I could be able to drive a Pan-African program with an understanding of what the context, the history, and the challenges and the contribution of the different African countries to our liberation struggle, which is something that is lacking here in South Africa. But the other issue is, it is not the fault of the Afrikaners or the Afrikaan-speaking people in South Africa that Black Africans and then a Black government has not invested in the development of African languages in South Africa, which are official languages. We have academics who would go and establish for example, be part of a languages department, Xhosa and whatnot, but who who seem to derive a perverse pleasure from speaking English in contexts where they should be using their own official language, which is Xhosa or Sotho or Tswana. We even have kings and chiefs who are traditional leaders would think that it's a sign of intelligence when they address their people speaking someone else's mother tongue, which is English. There's nothing wrong if you're trying to accommodate other people, say, in various contexts. But I think Africans themselves need to take it upon themselves to promote and develop their own languages and not leave it to other people. And then when other people, such as Afrikaans people do, develop their language, make sure that they keep it up to breast in terms of its jargon, its diction with the latest developments and technology, and we fail to do that and we blame it on them. We shouldn't be doing that. And if anyone, even if the person speaks Afrikaans, it doesn't matter, should be allowed to be educated in the language of their choice. It's their right to do so. In fact, what we should be doing is to learn from them as to how they are doing it and maybe apply exactly what they're doing in order to build and develop our languages. So the problem in South Africa, I think, is one of, we have the tools to be able to fix the challenges that face us. We have the people, we have the capabilities. What we require is the political will to do so. What we require in our country, as I was saying during the election trail when we're debating with sister opposition parties, I said, all the reasonable, like-minded and progressive individuals need to come around the table and say, what pact can we develop for South Africa's future? What social compact can we develop for the development of the country? Because most of us, the second layer of leadership, feel that the Cyril Ramaphosa generation and other his peers have done a sterling job during the liberation struggle. Theirs was to really liberate South Africa. Now, I think they must step aside so that the younger generation can be able to deal with the phase 2 of our struggle, the socio-economic challenges facing South Africa. Right? And to say, how do you address even issues of poverty, inequality, which are socio-economic? I do not think the ANC is able to do that because it is still stuck in the 1900 jargon. It is still stuck. I mean, I love Karl Marx as an economist myself. Obviously, we have to know all theories, but I think they are still stuck in failed theories that were tried and tested, done in the past, never delivered. Now we need people who understand what a 21st century economy requires in order for it to succeed.
Well, I have to agree with you 100%, with the exception of that I've now that I'm getting a little longer in the tooth, it's not simply because I'm getting longer in the tooth, but I've always been of the view that we could have a wide mix of leaders from across all generations. But when those leaders are hidebound and unwilling to change and unwilling to adapt, that's a problem. And that seems to be, I think, what you're saying about the senior leadership of the ANC. It's very frustrating. They continue to beat their head against the wall, knowing it's going to fail as if it's magically going to work, and it just doesn't work. And there could be a lot of reasons for it, but whatever the case is, it's kind of where we're at now. But some of the other things you talked about here a little while ago, and I think this is very good, and it's very refreshing to see you talk about this. I've talked about this frequently, of course, with my experience having lived all over the continent of Africa, and that's the informal sector. And you talked about the informal sector a while ago. We were discussing economics. And you know, in some countries in Africa, the informal sector is 3/4 of the entire economy. Some of the smaller countries, the informal sector, of course, for those not understanding the terms we're talking about, this is the trading and the service sector, the production that's not captured in statistics by the government, not taxed typically. And it's street vendors, people making things, that sort of thing. In much of Africa's actual economic output isn't even measured by the World Bank or IMF. And I'm not blaming the World Bank or IMF. I mean, because it's difficult, if not impossible, to capture it. But the point is, people look and go, oh, look, that's $500 billion is the size of Nigeria's economy. It's actually bigger than that, a lot bigger. And South Africa is, 240 billion or something like that, or 300, whatever. It's actually a lot bigger than that. And the reason I mention this is because you touched on something that really has a very negative effect on the informal sector. Police harassing informal traders, people not being able to get licensing, so they have to stay in the informal sector. And if you're licensed, you might be able to access a wider market. There really needs to be attention or an address to the informal sector in South Africa, because it's not 2/3 of the economy. It's probably maybe 20% or maybe a little bit more in South Africa. Different parts of the country, it's larger. But I've never heard any politician discuss this openly. You've just mentioned it, and do you think it's something we really should put a focus on, or am I just I'm just crazy? I've been called crazy before.
No, it's very true. It's one of the sectors that I'm very passionate about, because I've always argued in Parliament and other forums in South Africa that we always talk about this very high unemployment rate. Yes, unemployment is high in South Africa. I'm not denying that. Whether you're looking at the expanded definition of unemployment, which would take us to a 40% unemployment rate, or the strict definition of unemployment, which is about 30, 31, 32%. My issue was, I did my own survey very briefly to say that most of the people who are classified as unemployed actually are active in the informal sector of the economy here in South Africa. And up until we understand, we make it the responsibility not of the Stats SA, right, when they are doing research work or some academic institution, but we say to each municipality, your informal sector becomes your responsibility. And then you channel funding. The way that you support municipalities with grants, but for channel grants to hopefully functional and operational municipalities, that can then say, you first need to understand the size of the informal sector, in which sectors do they operate, right? And the nature and the kind of support that you need to provide to these sectors in order for these sectors to be able to graduate to more formal sectors, say, within a predetermined period of time. You are not going to do that and say they must graduate to the formal sector of the economy. If, for instance, if you say, hypothetically speaking, after you've made interventions, you encourage them to register a company, hypothetically speaking, say, register a company, operate a bank account, which would start from there. But you register a company today, 6 months later, you get a threatening SMS from SARS, right, saying you need to file your what, or you are going to be liable for penalties, right? Then no one is going to register companies. So it means that there needs to be a paradigm shift from all the role players and the policymakers when it comes to dealing with the informal sector of the economy and say, you are going to have to be patient with them for a period of time. You are going to make or create financial instruments, right, at municipal level that where they are, because in majority of instances, most of them would require a loan of 500 rands or 1,000 rands for whatever. A system similar, I think it's Grameen Bank, where they borrow, lend money, small amounts of money to the informal sector in order for them to have the cash flow they need to be able to buy stock and all of that, and agree on repayment periods that are slightly longer. All the financial packages and all the interventions that are made by government are targeted at the formal sector of the economy and not the informal sector. And that formal sector of the economy is the one where they are not embarking on any programs that are labor intensive. They are becoming capital intensive because they can afford it. And so they are shedding jobs. But the informal sector of the economy is always labor intensive. And if you understand, invest in it, support it, then you will not have an unemployment rate that is as high as it is. Because my view is that, yes, our unemployment rate is high, but the stats that we read on a daily basis are inaccurate because of that issue.
Well, that's a great point. Wow, we're turning this into the Austrian School of Economics here. I'm enjoying this. Is quite so. Let's continue on. Well, you're a trained economist, so I'm sure it's it's right down your alley. But let's go a little bit further. Yeah. Speaking of that, I've been railing against this for a long time, both when I worked as an intelligence analyst in the intelligence community in the U.S. and also since I've retired and I've been speaking publicly. And that is my frustration with the ANC and what I call dead capital. Most people living in RDP houses that the government has built don't own title to the house and the land that they're on. Now, all of those houses represent capital that's just dead. It's not being put to use. If the government would transfer every RDP house, every house they built for people, and the plot of land that it's on to the current occupants, they would free up billions of dollars, not rand, billions of dollars of capital overnight for just what you're talking about. If I suddenly own title to my house, I have collateral. I can go to FNB. I can go to First Rand. I can say, hey, listen, I want to build a tuck shop or a spaza, and this is my business plan, and this is what I want to do, and I just need 5,000 Rand to get some stock to get going. Well, you've got collateral now. They could take the risk on you. You're a more worthwhile risk. Those billions of dollars of capital just sitting on that. And one can't help but be skeptical, as I am, and say, gee, I wonder if that's just because the ANC wants people to be serfs and beholden to the government. Look, we gave you a house. Go vote for us. I know that's cynical, but to be fair, I mean, if the ANC would do that, we would create instant wealth for millions of South Africans, mostly, almost entirely black South Africans.
No, that's true. I mean, that also applies. I couldn't agree with you more there. You've hit the nail on the head. I mean, that also applies to a lot of villagers in rural areas who reside on communal lands, and the land on which they reside belong to the chiefs.
Well, you've like the Nqabayomzi Trust, the Zulu, 3.8 million hectares.
Correct. Even in the Eastern Cape, it's the same thing. So you build this beautiful state-of-the-art property for yourself, which probably is worth about, because that's the case, especially in rural communities. You find that most of the houses, some of them are actually worth more than R1 million, but because you don't own the piece of land, you can't even bond it, you can't use it as security. It's things because we grew up in those environments. We also, because by the virtue of being Black, we understand the context and the challenges that our people face. It's things that as policymakers, when we took over, we should have addressed. Yes, maybe at the beginning stages of the process, the intention was to ensure that our people do not all get an RDP house today and sell it the next day and then stand in the queue again for houses, because that is what was happening. Mm-hmm. But if we had created a national database from the word go, right? A national database instead of a provincial database, because what the problem is now is that you have a provincial database. So I can get an RDP house here today and then go to the Eastern Cape and queue for another RDP house instead of just having one house. Mm-hmm. But even though people can't sell these, it's dead capital, as you say, we have not prevented them from selling the houses, because now they use affidavits to go and sell the houses. And the intention really should not be to do that, because now you want them to be able to prove that they own the properties and they can be able to sell them if they want to. But also, as you are saying quite correctly, it's a collateral question to the bank and say, you need money, you put it up as security. And now people are not able to do that. And that will reduce the reliance on government.
Well, but even the system as it is now, and you're absolutely right, that's one reason, it was a legitimate reason not to do it, but there are ways to overcome that. There are mechanisms to make sure it doesn't happen. But even now, we have the same sort of situation you have in the UK, where there's council housing made available by the community for people, and people just, they sublease it, they sublet it. They let someone move in, they pay them rent, and they go live with someone else, and where they're not paying rent, and they're making money off it. So I mean, the same thing can happen in RDP house. So that's definitely a situation where that can happen. It is interesting. I talk about this dead capital. I think that's one way, if you're trying to reduce the wealth gap, that's the one quick step for it. Give people an opportunity, because I'm sure there are plenty. There are probably tens of thousands of South Africans who have the gumption, have the desire, may not have the education, but certainly the willingness to try to do something to contribute to the economy. And they're hamstrung because they just don't have any resources or a way to go about it. And that's just one way to, I think. And even if you're not starting a business, you own home. That's dignity. You own the land you're on. You own the house. This whole dispute about land that's going on, it's very disingenuous in my view across the board about land on all sides. But the one issue here is that most people that want land don't want to be farmers. ANC wants to put 1 million people on farms. The rest of the world is going the other direction. They're reducing the farm labor force, mechanizing, automation, robotics, and all that stuff. And the ANC wants to put 1 million. I don't think 1 million Black South Africans want to become farmers. Maybe some. Maybe some do, but most people know it sucks. It's hard work. I used to be a dairy farmer. I'm not going back to that.
Yeah, it's hard work. You're right.
Absolutely. But and it's not the path to success. Agriculture has these wild swings because of climate and seasons, boom and bust. One year you've got lots of maize, the next year there's no rainfall, you have no maize, or you get weevils that eat all your maize. That it goes back and forth. Or the Chinese suddenly dump 1 billion tons of grain on the market and the price falls out on it. Commodities are not the way to go. It's the high tech skills, it's the digital economy. That's what South Africans need to prepare for, and we're just not there. We're just not really there. Well, listen, we've got this election on Monday, and you don't have to respond here. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to invite you back to come on this weekend. I have 2 6-hour broadcasts, Saturday and Sunday, from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday. I'll have a few co-hosts who'll pop on now and then, but lots of guests from different parties, and you're welcome to come back on for that. And don't worry, it's not an hour and a half interview. It's just a 10, 15 minutes. How's it going? How's the campaign looking this week and that sort of thing. But I extend that offer to you. I'd like to have you come back if you're able to. But along those lines, we have one of your ward councillor candidates, and this is pronounced Luxolo Namet.
Namete. Luxolo Namete, yes.
Namete. Okay, so he'll be appearing on the program. We haven't narrowed down to time, so if you could send him a little note and say, hey, you tell Chris you'll come on tomorrow, so that I can get him on tomorrow before the weekend, and we'll do it at the same time as this. But he's agreed to come on the program. I'm excited to get him on because we've not had any ward councillor candidates for your party, and so this is a good opportunity. Do you see any places in this election where you're going to make a splash or you have a chance to make a splash. We've already talked about, the kind of the kingmaker role potentially in Nelson Mandela Bay in alliance with the Democratic Alliance, among others. And you've talked about a municipality in the former Transkei that's a place where you could probably take it back. But do you see places where you have a chance to either make a big splash, maybe grab a municipality, or at least become a new coalition that wasn't there previously?
We are going to make a splash in the King Sabara Dalindyebo municipality. And we are hoping that Tekwini municipality as well, we are going to be an important factor. The strategy really is to work with sister opposition parties and wrestle, firstly, all the metros away from the governing party, because they use those metros as their cash cows. But if then you are able to get 1 or 2, 3, 4 metros, then you'll be able to take even the rural municipalities away from them. So Tekwini Metro Municipality, definitely, without a doubt.
Okay, so make sure I'm not confusing or I'm mishearing correctly. Did you say Tekwini, Durban? Is that where you're talking about, or is it
Durban? Tekwini is the name of the municipality.
No, I know. I want to make sure I heard the pronunciation correctly.
Yeah,
Whoa! Yeah. Shots fired, ladies and gentlemen. Shots fired. The UDM is looking good. I had no visibility on that bubble. I know that the IFP and the DA have been putting a lot of energy and effort into Tekwini. The ANC only got 58% of the vote in 2016 in that municipality, and that's a municipality which, by rights, they ought to be able to walk all over the place because of its history. But they're definitely, in my view, going to go above 50% this time. The question is, how far do they fall? And it was already my prediction before the internal insurrection in the ANC that took place in July in KZN. I think that really is, for people whose eyes were, they were just, not paying attention. A lot of people have really woken up to what's happening and not happening in the ANC. Do you think that the riots and looting that took place there and also in Gauteng in July have had a positive impact, not for South Africa, but for the opportunities and prospects for smaller parties in this election?
No, of course, yes, without a doubt. I mean, we understood the events concerned us a great deal as South Africans, as patriotic South Africans. But once you sit down and you do your analysis, they also present you with opportunities, the smaller parties, to grow. Because then what happened, the riots, the unrest that took place there created a certain level of vulnerability in the African National Congress in those regions. Hence, we then deployed the Secretary General of the party to go and campaign there immediately. We also have our National Treasurer, Thandinon Denjo, who is focused on Johannesburg and the city of Johannesburg in particular, so that those who are disgruntled, who don't have a political home, can be able to find a political home in the UDM. And we hope that all the hard work and the resources that we invested in that are going to pay off.
Well, that is very interesting, and actually, the whole interview has been very fascinating. I've really enjoyed it, but that's a great way as we get ready to wrap it up. Okay, folks, watch this space at Tekwini. Let's see what happens here. Already, it was going to be a tight battleground because the Inkatha Freedom Party, the Democratic Alliance, both moving to take advantage of the ANC's fecklessness, I guess, is a good word for it, but its incompetence is certainly a word for it already. But now the UDM has also made a move, and I have to apologize because it's not being covered by the press. The UDM and other parties are barely mentioned in the press. Most of the press, in my view, is done not a particularly good job. I will lay this out there. I'm critical of News 24. I often call them captured media, but I will say this about the election coverage. From my perspective, they've offered a lot of election coverage. It's been reasonably balanced and fair, but there hasn't been much focus on the UDM, the Freedom Front Plus, the Inkatha Freedom Party. It's all been on the EFF, the DA, and the ANC, as if the other parties and the ANC. That's the third one. Yeah. It's as if they're the only parties exist. Now, you've been a coalition partner in Nelson Mandela Bay, for instance, with the DA. The DA is fighting, whether they intended to or not, kind of rearguard action because of the posters that went up in Phoenix. Also, this incident on Gareth Cliff's show, which is, I think, being blown wildly out of proportion. And they're accusing John Steenhuisen of making a smirk. And suddenly, that's more important than 60 people being murdered every day, no water, no electricity. Now, whether that may, in fact, be an important issue, but the election now for the DA, a lot of the attention is being diverted to things like that. And nobody's talking about the ANC. We're not even talking about the ANC. It's fascinating. But have you sensed the same sort of thing I've seen, where your party is not getting much attention in the press during this cycle?
Well, it's always the problem for us when it comes to elections. It doesn't matter how much you try to invest in building relationships of substance with the journalists and different media houses. It seems that when the election time comes, they listen to some of their bosses and they go along the ideological lines, and they always prefer to cover or to give a lot of coverage to the three largest parties in South Africa. I mean, how do you explain? We had an incident last week, Sunday, where we had our closing rally in Port Elizabeth. The DA had its closing rally 2 hours before we had ours. I mean, they started at 12 and finished at 1:30. We had to wait for them to finish because we're using the same venue, and we started at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. All the media houses attended the DA event. I mean, there was not going to be an additional cost for them to cover us because they were already there and their infrastructure was already on the ground. But when we started our rally, an hour, 30 minutes later, they were nowhere to be found. And these are the same media houses that confirmed 2 days before then that they were going to cover us. So it's a story of our lives, but we have decided to depend on door-to-door and word of mouth and social networks to campaign for parties and really not pay much attention to what is happening in the traditional media. I think it's been captured by some other dominant factions in various political parties.
No, I think it's a fair statement, and it is particularly frustrating. I agree, but I'll tell you what, it makes fertile ground for independent journalists like myself. We can point out hypocrisy. We can also actually cover events. When the bail hearing for the two suspects, who it turns out probably weren't even the murderers, it may have been the cops, in the murder of Brendan Horner took place last year in Senegal on the 6th of October. There was, to my knowledge, only ENCA had a journalist on the ground. No one else, no SABC, nothing else. And the whole country knew that this was a hot issue and that this was coming. And of course, we saw what happened that day. A vehicle got overturned and lit, and then the police throwing flashbangs at just people standing on the side of the street, not even involved in events. And that really got a lot of attention. No media outlets were there except for ENCA. I covered it live, and it was challenging because I didn't have a reporter on the ground, so I was taking social media feeds and calming down people and trying to analyze what's actually happening. Now, on the 20th of October, boy, they showed up in force then. They were all there then. Daily Maverick, ENCA, News 24, all these papers were there, all the SABC, all the media outlets, they all showed up then. They seem to have this habit of not having good critical thinking, in my view, about what's newsworthy, and that's really frustrating. I think that the launch of your party's platform, or I don't know if you call it a manifesto, but platform is I hate that word. It sounds like communism to me. I fought communism for 4 decades, and when people say comrades and cadres and manifestos, I get a little pullback. But whatever your party platform is that day you launched it, that's a newsworthy event. It's not like your party. It's not like Anyway, I could rail about this forever, but I can sense your frustration, and I don't want to put you on the spot with that. But let me do this. So we're going to have to wrap up here. You've been very generous with your time, and also coming You're welcome, so you came on the program very short notice. I appreciate that. So let me give you a chance to get a final message in here. Voters, I think a few eyes here have been opened in my audience this morning. You're like, wow, I didn't really. A lot of people see your party and they just assume it's like ANC light. Well, obviously it's not. We've talked about that. But a chance to maybe there'll be a lot of people watching this after this stream. Give people a chance to hear a last message about what they can do with their vote. Special voting starts Saturday and Sunday for those who aren't able to go to the polls on Monday, but the election's on Monday. So as the deputy president of the UDM, I'd like to give you a chance to just share here with the audience any thoughts about the election, maybe about South Africa's future, and maybe make a pitch to go vote UDM on Monday or Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I want to say is that South Africa has capable leaders who are able to take South Africa forward, who will be able to help South Africa to ensure that we take it out of the malaise of poverty and underdevelopment to some extent, that leaders who are capable of taking South Africa to the kind of South Africa that Nelson Mandela and his generation envisaged. Ours, especially the second layer of leadership, is to ensure that we build on the good work that was started by our struggle icons, and to make sure that we reposition South Africa again as a spokesperson of Africa on African issues, but also as a global leader when it comes to human rights issues, where we sing and we think that South Africa now has actually adopted a more confused and a confusing role. But insofar as the United Democratic Movement is concerned, we are calling on all South Africans to vote for us, because we know that as we have done where we govern, in areas where we co-govern, such as the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro, that we do not only bring you clean and corruption-free governments, but we bring governments that work, where services are delivered to the people, where there is accountability. One of the things that we have mastered over the years is to ensure that our councillors are connected to the people and they account to the people who elected them, as a way of trying to address the disconnect that has occurred between the elected and the electorate over the past years. We will make sure that if we get our votes and when we govern, we do those properly, and that we try and create jobs, and we use municipalities as a base for creating jobs and having the statistics that we require in order for us to make the necessary interventions. So yes, vote UDM.
Well, there you go. I think that's a great pitch. If you're undecided, folks, it's just a couple, and some people are undecided, just a couple days away. Open your eyes up. As I've told people now, this is not from the UDM. This is from Chris Wyatt. And I've been talking about this election since June of 2020, telling people to get out on the ground, bring people to your banner, bring people to your standard now, get in the townships, get in the mining hostels, get into the leafy suburbs, get in the urban areas. Because if you wait and you wait, then you're just competing with a whole rabble of parties. And we have 325 parties competing for this. So big challenge out there. But best of luck in this election. Hopefully maybe we'll get a chance to see you briefly this weekend. If not, maybe we'll check in with you later on. But we'll see how the UDM does. Lots of fertile ground for gaining more votes than you got in 2016. So I want to thank you once again, Bye Donkey Keleboa, for coming on the program. I don't know how to say that in Xhosa. Someone taught me that once.
You say Ndiabule.
Ndiabule. Okay, well, I probably butchered that. Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming to the program. And thank you for helping me get one of your ward council candidates on. Hopefully you have him on tomorrow morning, and people get introduced to someone who's running for your party. That's thank you very much. And with that, I'll go ahead and put you in the waiting room.
Much obliged to you.
You're most welcome. Please send my heartfelt greetings and thanks along to the General, Bantu Holomisa. He's a fine gentleman. It's my pleasure. You know, when I first got in touch with him, he said, of course, I'll be happy to come on and speak with my colleague, you know, because I'm a retired colonel, he's a retired general. And that was really heartwarming, so I appreciate it. All right, well, that's it. I'm going to put you in the waiting room and let you drop off, and then I'm going to close out my program. So once again, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
All right, folks. Well, there you have it. Wow, that's... once again, a fantastic guest. I mean, we're just sitting on all cylinders here this week. The candidate for the Ekurhuleni mayor for the DA, that's of course Refiwe Nsheka. She was fantastic. This gentleman, who's the deputy president of the UDM, is just also a fantastic guest. Great. It was fascinating for me to have an opportunity to talk to someone that gets economics. That's really cool because he trains economists. But I'm gonna embarrass myself and butcher his given name again, and so my apologies to him in advance. And that, of course, is my guest was Nqabayomzi Kwankwa. Well, thank you, sir, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been continuing coverage of the 2021 municipal elections for South Africa, which occur special votes Saturday and Sunday. That's the 30th and 31st of October. For those who already approved for that, that's people who can't go, disabled, in hospital, unable to be at the polling station on the day. For everyone else, it's time to go to the polling on the 1st of November, Monday, the 1st of November. It's a public holiday in South Africa. You have no excuse. Lay off the Casa Lager, put the Amarula to the side. Don't be liquored and schnockered up. Make sure you're sober. Go out and vote on Monday. 26 million South Africans have that opportunity. They're registered for this election. Thank you all so much. I'll catch you later today as I take a noontime break from my consulting gig to update you on the news from around Africa and around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been once again continuing coverage of South Africa's 2020 municipal elections. I'm Chris in Central Pennsylvania. I want to thank you all for tuning in. I really do appreciate your support. Be sure to smash that like button on the way out the door, folks, if you don't mind. I really appreciate it. And also let other people know about this stream because it was a fantastic conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. And my apologies for not asking a couple of questions about education. There really wasn't a chance to get to that. Maybe if we get them on again sometime, we'll do that. All right, folks, that's it. We'll catch you later. Take care of yourselves. As Big Daddy Liberty says, as we approach election, never trust a commie. And take a look at the ANC's senior leadership. Every single senior leader in the ANC is a card-carrying communist. That's right, folks. No doubt about it. The commies run South Africa. If you ever didn't believe it, take a look at the membership. Cheers. Oh, and Chris says, never trust an ANC cadre. There you go.